have one more trick up my sleeve with loops and arrays in Java, and that is what I call the for each loop. There are a lot of people who also call it an enhanced for loop. I think that's what it was originally called by the Java development team when they added it to the language, but I think a lot of people call it a for each loop. It gives us another way to iterate through an array or other kinds of collections when we know what those are, and it eliminates the need for us to worry about index numbers or going out of bounds or any of that kind of stuff because it handles it all for us. It's optional. Anything you can do with a for each loop, you can do with a traditional for loop as well. And often it's not very useful to us because it's very limited in how it works. But when you do need just a really basic front to back traversal, it gives us a nice, easy syntax, and we don't have to worry about going out of bounds on anything. So I'm assuming here that you already know how to work with loops in arrays and how to make arrays of objects as well. And if not, you can go view those videos. Otherwise, we will jump in. So I've started with two basic arrays here. One is an array of the dog class, and so you can download that code from Canvas. It's from a previous video. And then I've also got just a double array with some prices in it. And we want to have an example with objects and then an example of an array with primitives. And we're going to start by just a basic traversal, as we've been doing in other videos, where we want to output everything that is in the array. So the for each syntax is going to be really simple. Inside the parentheses here for the for statement, I am going to essentially declare a variable of the same data type as my array. So I'm going to do the dogs array first. The dogs array has objects from the dog class. I'm going to create a dog variable called D. And then you put a colon, the two dots, and the name of the array that you want to traverse. And so my array is called dogs. And the way this works is that every iteration, the variable D is going to be equal to the current dog in the array. So in other words, the first iteration, D is going to be Fifi, and then the next iteration it's going to be Fido, and then Rover, and then Spike, and then it's going to know that we're done with the array and it's going to stop. So there's none of this start at 0, end at length -1 kind of stuff. It just works and handles the array boundaries. So let's go system out println. Now the difference here when we work with this within the iteration is that the other difference is that I don't need that bracket syntax because inside this loop body, I'm not dealing with an array anymore. I'm dealing with a dog object. So I just can say dog dot get name, and I'll make it print out the dog's name and age, plus d dot get age. And let's go ahead and run this and see if it works. All right, and it does. Just like that, I have created a, a traversal, an output traversal, as I called it in another video, that just prints out every dog in the dogs array. And that's all it took, was just those couple of lines of code. And again, the idea is within that loop body, I'm dealing with just a good old-fashioned dog object or whatever other class we're using for our array. And I can do anything with it that I can do with a normal dog. So I'm going to I could do this within the same loop, but it's fun to make these and we're trying to learn how to do it. So I'm going to just do one again. And I'm going to say for, so the reason we call it a for each loop is the way that we would read that out is for each dog D in dogs, and then our loop. So that's where the name for each comes from. And what I'll do this time is I'm going to have the dog have a birthday. There's a method called have a birthday that, as you could probably guess, adds 1 to their age. Now I could put this in the same loop. It's not like the loop is limited to one line of code. So in fact, after they have a birthday, let's go ahead and print them out again right there. And I'm going to print a little divider just so that visually I got confused in one of those other videos. I don't want to have that happen again. Oops, I can't type either. So just a little dividing line so that I can tell which loop is which in my output. So let's try that one. All right, so the first time through, which is just the output, there are the dogs and their ages. Then the next loop, the next traversal, we have a birthday for each dog, and then we print them out again, and we can see that their age has increased by one for each dog. Now, this is great, right? This is a nice, easy syntax, much easier than remembering how to do a regular for loop if you're a new programmer. So why on earth would we ever use that old kind of for loop when we could just use this? There are a couple reasons. One is that this type of enhanced for loop or for each loop can only do a start to end traversal, what I would call like a standard traversal. It's going to start at index 0. It's going to go through each array element in order until it gets to the last element in the array. In other words, I can't go backwards. I can't skip some. I can't do anything unusual. It's just a front to back traversal. That may or may not be a big deal. There are some times when we want to move through an array backwards or in some different way. The other common reason why we might not use a for each loop in any given circumstance is that notice there's no counter variable here. There's no, this isn't a counter controlled loop. And so that's fine if all we're doing is printing out the element or something like that. But sometimes we need that index, right? If we're doing a search and I want to search through the array and check where an object is or where a value is in that array, and then end up with that index number so I can do something else with it later. I can't do that here, right? There is no, I, for example. So, what's funny is I sometimes have students that do something like this. They'll create a variable called I, and then in here they'll say I plus plus. I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but it seems sort of silly. If you need a counter like that, then just do a regular for loop. So I don't particularly like that, but that is another reason why we might not use a for each loop is because we don't end up with that counter. Now, we still can have an accumulator if we want, right? I could declare if I want to add up the dog's ages, I could make a variable called sum or total age or something, and then I could add to it within this loop as an accumulator. And then after the loop is done, I would have the total age of all of the dogs. So that doesn't prevent everything that we might do, but that is a pretty big limitation to only be able to go through it in one direction and to only be able to do it without having a counter. It does work essentially the same way if we want to do this with a primitive data type like double or int or any of those other primitives. For each double p, or I'll say double price in prices, okay, and I like the way that reads. For each double price in the array prices, again, I can just say system out print line, and I can print out price, and that's going to just print that value out. I could also, I could also do some math with it. I could say double total. I'll do an accumulator like I was just talking about equals 0.0, and I could add on to that. I could say total plus equals price, and now at the end of that, I can print out the total. Go ahead and try that. See if I've made any mistakes. It looks good. You saw in the other video, we could add $1 to each one or something like that. But that is the basic syntax and usage for a for each loop, or what some people call an enhanced for loop. Really, really useful. You can't use it all the time, but it's a nice, it's one of those nice to know things, not a need to know things, right? You can program without it, but now that you know how easy it is, you'll probably want to use this a little bit too. I do need to caution you. You got to make sure that you use whatever loop is specified by my assignment if you're turning in an assignment for my class, because I do consider for each to be optional, and I don't want you using it on assignments until you've shown me that you can use traditional for loops first. So keep that in mind. But if you have any questions about for each loops, reach out.